What I'd like to show you how to do now is how to construct a sponge cake. So I've got my sponge cake already made and I just need to cut it to size. So by putting the board and cutting it straight down, keeping your knife nice and straight. And with the second one. Move this to one side. So I've got them equal sizes. I'm going to have a 2-layer sponge. And you can see from what's stuck to the table here, it's the skin of the cake. Now that needs to be removed. If you don't remove it, when you come to cut a slice of cake, you'll find that the sugar paste will separate away from the sponge cake and usually on the plate, and it just falls off. So we want that sugar paste to stick to the cake, not to fall off. So I'm just going to take off, and you can cut it off or you can rub it off. Sometimes you can rub it with your hand. Doesn't matter as long as it comes away. And usually the skin of the cake will come away quite easily. Okay. And I'm going to do the other side as well. You can even do it with a palette knife. You don't always need a knife. Okay. So what I'm going to test now is whether I've got a flat cake. So this was cut out from a sheet, but it's not guaranteed that my cake will be nice and flat. Actually, that doesn't look too bad. If you find that it goes down at one side, then what I suggest you do is just turn the sponge cake around. See, that one is making the sponge cake go down that way. Yeah, I think the best one is that. If you turn it and it's still not quite level, then you can trim it off to make it level with a knife. What I suggest you do is use the knife to just make a mark with the sponge. So what's happening now is when I separate the cake and then come to put them back together, I'm matching up those two sides the same, so I know it should be level. Just tidying up my workstation. I've still got the bowl full of scraps here. So I'm just going to lift this top one off and place it there. So I know it's just got to go back on top. I've got raspberry jam. It's a little bit, it's just come out the freezer. It's a little bit lumpy, so I'm just working it. So I've got the jam, and that's going on there. I'm not going to put a lot of jam on because I find that when you layer up a cake and the jam and the cream mixed together can make the cake slide. So I'm just going to put enough on for what I want, but not too much. Now I need to put my cream in. The only problem with cream is if I put it on with a palette knife, I can't guarantee that it's going to be level. So I'm using a piping bag. Fold the bag over, cut the end off, but be careful with this where the end's going to go. Put it on the floor in the bin. And I'm going to use a piping tube. Just going to put the cream, filling cream, put some cream. I'm using fresh cream into the piping bag. Again, I don't want the layer to be too thick because I don't want it to slide and squeeze out. But also I don't want it to be too sweet to eat. So just piping around, and using the piping bag will create less damage to the cake as well. But now I know that I've put the cream on so it's level. I can lift it up, place it on top. And I know with those 2 cuts I've got the right side. What I now need to do is to put some cream on it, because I'm just gently pressing it down. I've got some more some cream, and I need to put a masking on it, not too thick at all. So I'm paddling almost like royal icing. You can see that I'm trying to get the cake nice and straight, filling in any gaps. If it picks up a little bit of jam, I'm not too concerned, but as long as I don't break any of the sponge cake off, I'll be okay. So it's just a thin covering. I'm using a paddling motion. I'm doing the sides first. And then lastly I'll do the top. But it is only a masking of cream. It's just to stick the sugar paste to the cake. I'm just going to place this cake to one side so that I can cover some sugar paste. Now I'm going to clean it. Okay, so I've got my cake, I've got a board. Let's place it on. I've got my sugar paste, a smoother, icing sugar and a palette knife. So I need to knead my sugar paste. And when I roll it out, I need to form a square because the cake's square. Roll it out on icing sugar. Try not to put any icing sugar on top of your cake. On top of your sugar paste. Roll it out in front and turn it. So as before, you turn it so that you can get an even thickness, so the same thickness all the way over. And you turn it so to make sure it doesn't stick to the table. Now don't go too thin with the sugar paste because that cake is lumpy and bumpy in places and we want it to look nice. And you can see what I'm doing, I'm just making it into a square as I go. Checking the size of your cake, measuring it. So I'm measuring mine with a rolling pin, checking the size. Perfect. I'm now going to move the cake over here a little bit so you can see it better. Cake crumbs, my hand. Make sure the surface around the cake is clean. Lift up your cake, your sugar paste, and place the sugar paste on. Now, this is the part that's just a little bit more trickier, and you've got to be careful because that sponge is quite soft underneath. It's not a fruit cake, it's a bun marzipan. It's a sponge cake. And because it's square, we need to do it a little bit differently. So with a square cake, you do the corners first. And you're just stroking it into the corners. Ignore the sides, and I'm going to do that with every corner. So I'm stroking from the edge in. I'll do the same with this one, and then finally this one. And if you do this with the corners, then you'll find the side will take care of itself. If you've got a little crease like that, just open it up. There's definitely those corners first. Don't want to fold on the corners. If you find that the corners are going down a little bit, just lift it up. And the sugar paste will support it. What you then need to do is just push the sugar paste in to the bottom of the cake. Not so it's folded up, but just towards the cake. And it forms a crease. I'm then going to use a clean palette knife and trim it off. Now, when you do this, you put it against the cake and cut down. So I know that palette knife is nice and straight. If you start cutting like this, you'll put too much off. Sugar paste can be used for another cake. Just have a look, have I got enough off? Let's bring a little bit more off this side. Then I can work with the cake smoother, but nice and gently, remembering it's sponge cake. So, just smoothing it on top, and you can see that it's taking out any lumps or bumps. I'm not being heavy with this cake smoother at all. Then I'm doing each side. What I'm not doing is rounding off those corners. I've spent a long time getting that corners quite straight, so I'm not going to go and flatten it now. And I'm doing that with each side. Support it with a smoother. Just smoothing it out if you've got any marks. And then I'm going to do is just gently just stroke that edge. And that should be it. I don't want this edge too round, I don't want these corners too round. I've got my board. I'm using a clean palette knife, placing the palette knife underneath the cake, lifting it up, placing my hand underneath to transfer it. Make sure that's in the centre. Take my hand out and take the palette knife out. Make sure I've got no cake crumbs on my hand. I don't want to mark the cake there. Yep, and I can look to see if it's straight by looking down, or I can use the palette knife to measure to see if it's in the right place. And that's fine.